Hello and welcome to our Peel-Halton Local Employment Planning Council's Labor Market Information webinar. This webinar is the first in our educational outreach session and is aptly titled Fundamentals. My name is Andrea Lenfesti and I am the Communications Specialist for the Peel-Halton Workforce Development Group. I will be acting as moderator for today's webinar. Okay, at this point I would like to introduce you to our featured speakers so we can get right into our content. Our first speaker is Ella Shadpour. Ella is a researcher and analyst with the Peel-Halton Local Employment Planning Council. Ella completed her master's degree in business economics at Wilfrid Laurier University. Previously, she was working at Ryerson University as a research associate. She has 4 years of experience in economic research, market research, data analysis, and modeling. Next, we have Christopher McLeish, who is our senior researcher and analyst with the Peel-Halton Local Employment Planning Council. Chris graduated from the University at Buffalo with a PhD in educational psychology and worked previously at the Social Planning Council of Peel and Humber College. Okay, over to you, Ella.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your participation today. This is the first webinar from our series of webinars on labor market information. In this webinar, we will discuss the fundamentals of labor market. We will start with introducing the Peel-Halton Local Employment Planning Council. Then we will define the labor market and some of its main variables. After that, we will bring some examples to illustrate the relationship between a demographic variable and a labor force variable. And at the end, we will describe the North American Industry Classification System, or NAICS codes. Local Employment Planning Council, LEPC, is a project funded by MTCU, the Ontario Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities, which has been recently renamed to the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Development. We are running one of the LEPC projects focused on the Peel and Halton regions. In this project, we have 4 main stakeholders: employers, employment and training service providers, government, and the Peel and Halton communities. The purpose of the LEPC project is to improve labor market information, labor market outcomes by educating these stakeholders on labor market issues and trends, and by strengthening the relationship among these stakeholders. What is the labor market? Labor market is the interaction between employers and workers, where employers are considered as a demand side and workers are considered as a supply side of the market. Like any other markets, labor market supply and demand are affected by both global and local conditions. For example, an economic crisis in a trade partner country can make the local labor market unstable. The 2008 financial crisis in the United States not only had internal negative impacts, but also affected the labor market in the U.S. trade partners, including Canada. For instance, industries that were highly dependent on export to the U.S. were financially impacted. As a result, they reduced the size of their labor force. Now let's look at an example of a local condition. The Bank of Canada has dropped the interest rate over the past 18 months. As a result of that, businesses can access low-cost financing for their projects. This helps businesses retain their existing labor force and hire new employees. So why labor market information is needed? In general, labor market information is a valuable piece of information for decision-making and long-term planning on education and job creation in any communities. These are the 3 main variables of labor market: labor force participation rate, unemployment rate, and employment rate. First, let's see what the labor force is. The labor force is the fraction of the total population aged 15 years and older that is either employed or unemployed but seeking for employment. To make it more clear, let's look at this diagram. Total population aged 15 years and older are divided to two main categories: in the labor force and not in the labor force. In the labor force population are people who are employed or unemployed but seeking for employment. So basically they are in the labor market, they are working or looking for work. Not in the labor force are people who are not interested in paid work or retired, so they are not in the labor market. Now that we have a good understanding of a labor force, let's see what the labor force participation rate is. Labor force participation rate is the fraction of total population aged 15 years and above who are in the labor force, which means who are employed or looking for employment. For calculating the labor force participation rate, we should find the ratio of labor force to the population of age 15 years and above. Let's take Milton as an example. In 2011, labor force population in Milton was over 48,000, and the total population aged 15 years and over was over 62,000. For calculating the labor force participation rate, we should divide 48,000 by 62,000 and we get 76.7% for participation rate in Milton. Unemployment rate. Unemployment rate is a fraction of labor force that are unemployed or do not have paid job. For calculating the unemployment rate, we should find the ratio of unemployed population to the labor force population. In case of Milton in 2011, we get 5.6% for unemployment rate. Employment rate. Employment rate is a fraction of population aged 15 years and above who are employed. So for calculating that, we should find the ratio of employed population to the total population aged 15 years and above, which in case of Milton is 72.4%. Again, for calculating the employment rate and labor force participation rate, the denominator is the total population aged 15 years and above. But for calculating the unemployment rate, the denominator is the labor force population. Now we have a quiz. We are looking at Mississauga labor force data for 2013. We want to calculate labor force participation rate and unemployment rate. We'll give you 2 minutes to calculate these ratios and then we'll go over the results together. Okay, this is how we calculate it. For calculating labor force participation rate, we should find the ratio of labor force to the total population aged 15 years and above, which we get 68.4%. For unemployment rate, we should divide the unemployed population by the labor force population, which we'll get 7.8% for unemployment rate.
Okay, thank you, Ella. Excellent presentation. Next, we have Chris McLeish, our senior researcher. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Ella. I would like to briefly highlight the importance of labor market literacy. The prime working age populations of Peel and Halton were projected to grow faster than the prime working age population of Ontario. Unemployment has also decreased slightly in Peel and Halton between 2011 and 2015. In other words, the Peel and Halton labor markets are becoming more competitive, and a firm understanding of labor market information can add to a job seeker's competitive edge. We can learn more about the labor market by studying a pair of variables, namely a social demographic variable and the labor force variable. To illustrate, let's look at the unemployment rate in a Peel neighborhood and the percentage of people with no religious affiliation. In this example, we're using data from 19 Peel neighborhoods. For each neighborhood, we have a data point, our XY coordinates, X horizontal, Y vertical. Unemployment rate is our labor force variable and vertical coordinate, while the percentage of people with no religious affiliation is our demographic variable and horizontal coordinate. When we graph these data points, we can see if a high unemployment rate is associated with a high or low percentage of people with no religious affiliation. The lowest data point on the graph is the Meadowvale Village West Gateway neighborhood. Move your eyes horizontally to the 9% mark. Then move your eyes up to around halfway between 6% and 8%. That is where you'll find the data point. The trend line describes the spread of data points. And since the line is almost flat, we've learned that unemployment rate does not reflect the percentage of people with no religious affiliation. A flat trend line means that there is no relationship. In our second example, the percentage of people with a bachelor's degree is our demographic variable. The trend line has a negative slope, which means that it's moving downward. This line shows us that a lower unemployment rate reflects a higher percentage of people with a bachelor's degree. Our next topic is industry classification. The North American industry classification system is used to organize businesses into families that provide similar services. Each family is a multi-level sector, with level 1 being the most general category and level 5 being the most specific category. There are 20 sectors in the North American industry classification system. For example, construction and professional, scientific, and technical services. Think bookkeepers, engineers, and researchers. A labor force variable may vary across sectors. For example, the unemployment rate was lower in professional, scientific, and technical services than in construction and manufacturing. We are now going to check your understanding of the relationship between a demographic variable and the labor force variable. I will read the question aloud. In another part of Ontario, a researcher examined the relationship between the percentage of people who completed a post-secondary degree in Ontario and unemployment rate. She graphed the data and obtained a flat trend line. What does this trend line suggest? There are 4 options, and I'll also read them to you. A, unemployment rate is strongly related to the location of post-secondary degree conferral. B, employability is diminished when people earn a degree in one province and seek work in another. C, unemployment rate is not indicative of the percentage of people with an Ontario post-secondary degree. D, in general, it is difficult to predict variation in unemployment rate. We'll give you a few minutes to think of an answer to the question. The correct answer is C. Unemployment rate is not indicative of the percentage of people with an Ontario post-secondary degree. Why is this the answer? The flat trend line tells us that there's no relationship between the 2 variables, the demographic variable and the labor force variable. To conclude, we're now going to revisit the main concepts of the webinar. The labor market refers to employers and their demand for workers, as well as workers themselves and their availability. The main labor force variables are participation rate, unemployment rate, and employment rate. We can learn about the reason for high or low levels of a labor force variable by graphing labor force data with respect to demographic data. The North American Industry Classification System is a framework for categorizing business sectors. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for attending today's webinar. That's all the time we have today. Also, if you're looking for more local, reliable, and timely labor market information, be sure to visit our sister site, www.workinginpelhalton.com. On behalf of Chris, Ella, and the entire team at the Peel Halton Local Employment Planning Council, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to view our presentation. My name again is Andrea Lenfesty, and it was a pleasure spending the time with you today. Have a great day. Thank you.